Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to the next in the Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative series of webinars. Great to welcome a number of participants back who have been at every webinar and many interstate visitors to this event. My name is Anne Livingston and I will be chair and moderator for today's webinar for the collaborative. This webinar is part of a series of sessions being facilitated by Community Resourcing for the Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative. At Community Resourcing, we use our international expertise and networks to build community capacity through empowerment, knowledge transfer, skills enhancement, research and development projects. I acknowledge the support provided for this project by the Queensland Government, Department of Communities, Child Safety and Disability Services. This support is helping to bring together an online platform for community care service providers and users of community care services who are interested in collaborating on issues and practices related to smart assistive technology. And as well, this funding is helping to undertake events such as this webinar. We've somewhat been overwhelmed with the response that we have received from the development of this platform, and we thank you for this interest and uptake. We were extremely honoured to have this week been awarded the National ITAC Best Initiative as voted by Consumers Award at a conference in Melbourne today for our project, and particularly recognising the developments we've undertaken recently in the development of a consumer and family portal. As well, we have been previously recognised by having been awarded the ICT Innovative Entrepreneurial Award in late 2015 for the collaborative, and several reference group members have been recognised in the Advanced Queensland Community Digital Champions project. I also recognise that our expert reference team member, Professor Greg Teggett, was awarded in this year's Australian of the Year program, particularly noting his work in enabling technology and his work in this collaborative. Professor Teggett is also currently Australia's ACT Senior of the Year. I would like to take this opportunity to also acknowledge our finalists being finalists in the eHealth Queensland Showcase Awards recently. I'd like to particularly thank the members of the expert reference team who you can see listed on your screen now. These members contribute voluntarily to the development and focus of the collaborative. We've been really moving on a number of projects in the collaborative, including extensive engagement strategies throughout this state, nationally and internationally. If you haven't already joined the collaborative, I'd encourage you to log on now and actually register, and encourage you to give the link to others in your organisation to register. You'll see from this slide where geographical reach is extensive and is increasing daily. So thanks for all the help that people in the collaborative have done to ensure that we're linked with experts around the world, but also experts in this state and nationally. Remind everyone that we have launched a consumer family portal and it is now live. We're currently collecting case studies and content for that part of the collaborative, so I'd encourage you, if you've got some particular areas of interest, to contribute them. Before starting today's presentation, I'd just like to note that neither the Community Resourcing or the Department of Communities, Child Safety and Disability Services excuse me, are promoting or endorsing any particular product, research entity or organisation. Rather, our webinars have been brought together to inform viewers of various examples of smart assistive technologies in development and/or in deployment, as well as the service models and workforce design required to adopt and adapt to these new technologies. A bit of housekeeping for today's session. As attendees of today's sessions, and in the interest of recording, we have muted your microphones. If you have any questions, please add these to the question pane on your dashboard to the right of your screen. There will be an opportunity at the end of the session to have these answered, so I'd encourage you to get these questions in early, because in previous webinars we've been inundated with questions. Any questions that we do not get to in the context of today's session, we'll follow up with you after the session with answers. Today's session is aligned to our focus on smart assistive technology and workforce development. Today's session will be delivered by Dr. Claire Mason from CSIRO. Claire leads the Socio-Economic Analytic and Innovation Initiative in Data61 CSIRO. This initiative specialises in harnessing structured and unstructured data to achieve insights for government and industry regarding the social and economic impacts of digital technology. Its goal is to support Australians in realising the benefits and to minimise negative impacts associated with ongoing developments in digital technology. Claire is renowned nationally and internationally, and in the course of her research career she has published over 20 peer-reviewed journal articles, countless technical reports, and has led some large-scale research projects funded through the Australian Research Council grants and public and private sector funding. In her spare time she serves on the editorial review board for the group and for group and organisational management, and was formerly the organisation behaviour editor for the Australian Journal of Management. In today's session, Claire will discuss how tomorrow's digitally enabled workforce will be positioned for the future of work in 35. Welcome, Claire, to today's presentation. Welcome.
Thank you, Anne and Liz, who's here with me today, and thank you all for being online. We've talked about this research in a range of forums now, but we love to think that some of the work that we're doing informs people's thinking and helps them prepare for some of the changes that might lie ahead for us in our work environments. So the first slide shows the large team of people and organisations who came together to support this research. And the reason they did that was because they saw a need to respond to the enormous forces for change that currently face us, things such as rapid technological development, new business and employment models, increasing globalisation, climate change, and then real social change in our employment and workplace relations. And in light of this fairly turbulent environment, there was seen to be a need for information that can help people and organisations to identify and prepare for the emerging opportunities of the future. So to provide people with that sense of what might lie ahead, we engaged in a strategic foresighting process. And this next slide gives you a sense of the stages that we go through in doing this. And I guess the key point I want to make here is that it's not a dark art. We begin just by doing a background study that gives you a sense of the current state of work environments and work itself. And then we do a very broad environmental scan, which includes traditional data analysis, reviews of the literature, interviews and workshops with experts to classify, validate and prioritise the range of trends that are affecting our labour market environment. And then we go through a bit of a screening test where we look for evidence that each of those patterns of change are actually occurring and likely to continue into the future, and also to check that they are relevant to the issue at hand, in this case future ways of working. And then what we do is we pull out from that the most salient patterns of change and future events that could have implications for the way in which we work, and we call those the mega trends, the mega shocks and the scenarios, and that's mostly what I'll talk about today. Sort of the big patterns of change that we see changing the way in which we work in the future. We then craft a narrative which we hope then can provide a sort of way of thinking about what the future might look like that can inform strategic decision making for people such as yourselves in the organisations you work in. So I really hope that this will have some relevance for your thinking. So this next slide shows you the 6 megatrends that came out of that big scanning process. These are the deep-seated, long-term trajectories of change that we believe will influence the way in which we work in the future. And I'll talk through each of those. The first one, and possibly the most important, we call the second half of the chessboard. And that's actually drawing upon some work that was done in the US at Massachusetts Institute of Technology by Brunholson and McAfee. What they talked about was a very old parable about how the game of chess was invented. The story goes that the inventor presented his game to the Emperor of India, who was so impressed with the game that he said that the inventor could nominate any reward he liked. And the inventor, liking to seem modest, no doubt, said that all he wanted was a grain of rice for the first square on the chessboard and to double that for each subsequent square on the chessboard. And for the first half of the chessboard, the rice builds up, that's for sure, but the kingdom is not impacted. But as exponential growth plays out, as it always does, by the second half of the chessboard, when exponential growth gets going, we have an impossibly large debt. The story can end one of 2 ways. One is where the kingdom changes hands and the inventor actually becomes the Emperor of India. The other side of the story that sounds more real to me is that the inventor actually loses his head. The key point here is not that you shouldn't invent games, but that digital technology is showing the same pattern of exponential growth and impact as that rice did on the chessboard. Computing power has been doubling every 18 months, and concurrently we see a significant decrease in its cost. So the memory and the capacity processing speed of your smartphone is actually comparable with that used on the Apollo guidance computers in the space missions back in the whenever it was, my memory's appalling. So some people argue that we hit the second half of the chessboard in 2006. Whether or not that's exactly right, the key point is that we are yet to feel the full impact of this exponential growth in computing power, device connectivity, data volumes, and artificial intelligence. So the theory is that as this computing capability grows, many more jobs will be automated and at a faster rate than we have ever seen before. One analysis predicts that 47% of the jobs that we currently do today could be fully automated within 15 years. That same analysis has been carried out for the Australian workplace, and an estimate was that 43% of the jobs that we do at the moment could be fully automated. We don't believe this is a disaster. We believe that, as has always happened in the past, new jobs will also come online. What we do think, though, is that this is going to be a period where rapid transitions are critical. So that's the first trend. Another one that we see affecting the way in which we work in the future, we've labelled porous boundaries. And this porous nature of boundaries applies to national boundaries, to organisational structures, to even where we work. So currently, the rate of globalisation continues to increase. Our population is more mobile than ever before. People, companies and countries are less restricted by borders and distance. And effectively, the world is becoming one large labour market. Thanks to cloud computing and our reliance on digital technology to deliver goods and services, we truly can have really geographically diverse workers sharing data and information to produce things together and work much more flexibly and diversely than ever before. Another big development is the world of platform economics. Here I'm talking about things like Airbnb and Etsy and Uber. Those platforms are also emerging in the labour market, and on this slide you're seeing some of the large names in this space: Airtasker, Upwork, Innocentive, and we've just picked a few of the jobs that are advertised on some of these websites. The key thing about these platforms is that they provide a means through which people who have never met before, who are potentially on the other side of the world, can transact quickly, efficiently, and with a clear picture of the risks and rewards. So if these online platforms facilitate the trust that is required for transactions to occur between complete strangers. And what that means is it actually calls into question the rationale and the need for people to work in organisations. So we originally came together because no one individual would be able to do all the work involved in sourcing their market and dealing with the legal challenges and the communications and delivering the work. But through these platforms, it is incredibly efficient to connect with our customers and transact business. And so what it calls into question is whether we still need organisations in the way that we've traditionally had them. And then we also have a rise in new ways of working where people, instead of sharing organisational structures, share workspaces through co-working arrangements. So this next graph shows you the rate at which freelancing, that's the line that's going up exponentially, and use of co-working spaces, which is the bar graph, has been increasing in recent times. So this trend has yet to hit Australia, but we're looking at data that comes out of the US and other countries around the world. And what we believe is that this may mean that companies in the future opt for new kinds of staffing models where they have a really small number of core staff who then contract out work as required to freelancers and portfolio workers. So there are going to be many ways in which we work in the future. We might be employees of an organisation but working from home. We might be freelancers in a co-working site with other freelancers. Or we could be portfolio workers with multiple income streams and ways of working. Another megatrend we think will be important is, I'm missing a slide here, but I will just talk it through, what we're calling divergent demographics. And here we're focusing on a couple of different factors. One is the ageing of our population and our workforce. By 2035, which is the end date we're predicting towards, 1 in 5 Australians will be over the age of 65. We've also seen an increase in female labour force participation, and concurrently with that, which not many people are talking about, a decrease in male labour force participation. So a wider range of people probably working for longer, more balance between male and female. On top of that, there is a major rise in the incidence of chronic and lifestyle diseases. So whilst people are living for longer, they're also more likely to be living with a mental health problem, obesity, and other types of lifestyle diseases. On top of that, we have migrants making up an ever large proportion of our working age population. So in the future, employers will be managing an increasingly diverse labour force with a different age, health issues, and social status. And so they're going to be responding to a greater variety of needs and issues. All the workers who perhaps want shorter working hours, those experiencing mental health problems who maybe have difficulty dealing with the uncertainty of the future. And all of these things potentially having quite a negative impact on productivity. We also believe that as these play out, we will see through the automation of work and the erosion of traditional employment relationships, that for many in the future, it will be harder to find what we think of as the ideal job in a larger organisation. And small businesses, which are traditionally Australia's largest employers, have had a smaller share of the labour market ever since the GFC. So in the future, more people will need to create their own jobs, and they'll need entrepreneurial skills and aptitudes to do that. The digital technology will help here because it does make it feasible for the person on the street to start their own social enterprise or small business. Communications are cheaper online, and you can sell your niche product, be that stripy socks or aged care provision, to an international market through these digital platforms. So we also believe it's going to be the era of the entrepreneur. There was my missing slide. Sorry, everybody. I'll skip over to tangible intangibles. So this is another mega trend. Here we're talking about the fact that in recent times, the services sector, which deals more in intangibles than, say, manufacturing or agriculture, is the major employer in the economy. And this will increase in the future. We've already talked about the fact that we have an ageing and generally less well population, which means that there will be increased growth in demand for aged care and healthcare. There will also be increased demand, we believe, for education and training for people who need to reskill to respond to all these transitions that lie ahead. Concurrently, though, we believe we'll also see the rise of what we're calling the experience economy, which is where businesses actually get paid a premium or get paid for creating memorable events for clients, where the memory and the enriched experience are actually the product itself. So that's things like active tourism, which we already see, but also things like paying a premium just to shop in a real environment rather than a virtual environment because of the experiences and the memories that you enjoy from doing that. Not only will we as workers be producing more intangible things, but the younger workers who are coming online are looking for more intangible kinds of rewards for working. They seek things such as lifelong learning and the ability to derive meaning from their work and have an impact on the world. And many of them are entrepreneurial, with 60 to 70% of them reporting that they want to start their own business at some stage. And then the final trend that we believe will rise is called a rising bar, and I must confess the concept of a rising bar makes me feel a bit tired sometimes. But what we're talking about here is the fact that technology and automation will take away the low-skilled, less complex tasks. Increasingly, it will have the capacity to take away even medium-skilled tasks. And so the work that's left over for the human worker will be the more complex work. On top of that, we've talked about the fact that digital platforms and digital technology make it easier for overseas workers to deliver the work anywhere in the world. So China and India will soon become the source of the largest number of tertiary educated workers in the world. And those people will be in a much better position to compete for the jobs in Australia. So the consequence is that there will be a raised bar for entry into many professions and occupations in the future. And I'm going to talk through that in a little bit more detail. So for example, on this slide here, we're using data from the Australian Bureau of Statistics Labour Force Survey. And what we've got with these lines is just the number of people working in occupations categorised as skill level 5, which is the lowest level of skill, up to skill level 1, the highest level. And when you look at 1986, which is where this graph begins, you can see that the top bar, the largest number of people, were working in skill level 4 occupations, which is roughly equivalent to a Certificate 2, Certificate 3 kind of education. But this occupational group grew only modestly up until 2016, and you can see towards 2006 was overtaken by skill level 1. So we've gone from most people being Certificate 2 or 3 in terms of their qualifications to now most workers having a tertiary level kind of qualification. And we believe that trend will only increase. So maybe you've heard this before, that we need higher levels of skills. What kinds of skills do we mean by that? Maybe you've heard of STEM skills, maybe you've heard of communication skills. We've done some analyses to try and answer that question in a bit more detail. We've taken all our occupational data and linked it up with some fairly unusual data that came out of the US Department of Education and Training. What they did was got human resources managers across the whole economy to rate how important various skills were for each of the occupational groups that they managed. So now we know what skill sets are required for what occupations. We link that back to the Australian workforce, and we look at how occupations have grown over time and what skills were required in the occupations showing the greatest growth. And we just broke down those skill sets into 3 categories: technical skills, STEM skills, and communication skills. And what I hope this graph conveys is that where the growth is occurring is not in the jobs that require technical skills, and not even as much in the STEM skills, science, technology, engineering, and maths. The greatest growth has been occurring in jobs that require high levels of communication skills. And that makes sense if we stop and think about it, because while I often joke that I'd rather have a tireless and ever-patient robot look after me in my old age than my ingrate little children who'll probably leave me to starve, the truth is that if the house was burning down, it is the children I would save before the robot. And that's because of my depth of relationship with the children versus the robot. And we believe as the world becomes ever more technologically enabled, the thing that will differentiate the human worker from the machine worker, the reason why an employer will still employ a human instead of a robot, is because of their ability to form relationships, to connect, to negotiate, and to solve problems with a customer. And so these are the kind of skills that become ever more important in the future. And we can also break that down into different kinds of skills, but I won't bother you with that at the moment. So I've covered what we see as the 6 major forces affecting the way in which change occurs over the future. And when we project that forward to the year 2035, we come up with what you could call a space of many possible futures that could occur. We can't tell you which of those will occur, but what we try and do is identify the key areas of uncertainty and impact and then look at how they could play out. So we're kind of trying to map the space of what is possible. And we believe the first really important uncertainty and really high level of impact is the extent to which we do see this potential for technological advancement actually playing out. So we certainly don't see any future where we've got less automation than we currently have. There will always be some increase in the amount of automation that we rely on in our work and in delivering our services and products. The question is how much more impact? There is a future where the promise of artificial intelligence comes to fruition and the majority of human tasks are performed better, faster, more safely and more cheaply by robots. We may even see the development of empathetic artificial intelligence which actually replaces my children with the robot. You never know. If this comes to pass, there will be very different job opportunities and we'll all need very different skill sets from those that exist today. But there are arguments for saying that we won't realise this full potential of artificial intelligence. Here are some of the reasons why. First, there could be really significant increases to cybercrime and privacy breaches, which result in lack of trust in automated systems and hold back the extent to which they are adopted. We can also see interoperability problems, which are already difficult for organisations to deal with, further constraining the extent to which we're able to adopt new digital technology. And some of the technologies, such as the driverless cars, may not ever prove good enough for widespread adoption. So there is a potential where, yes, we see a higher level of automation, but the jobs and the skills that are required are not too different from those we see today. That's the first area of uncertainty. The second one we think could come to be is around how much change we will see to firms and organisational structures. So as we said, things are becoming more porous. The peer-to-peer marketplace and platform economics is already beginning to create a change to how people work. So in the late 20th century, we saw just-in-time inventory management very much reducing the amount of inventory that people kept on hand. And in the future, we may see a situation where human resources managers also are incredibly efficient with how much employee inventory they keep on hand and instead rely on just-in-time freelance and portfolio workers to deliver much of their work. And in that future, workers in high-cost economies such as Australia could really struggle to compete. Our governments will need to take action to create some safety nets for these workers. But we believe there is also potential for these models to fail to take hold and for the traditional employer and employee relationships to remain dominant. So at the moment, peer-to-peer marketplaces have yet to achieve really broad consumer trust. Government regulation may yet protect long-standing incumbents and prevent some of this change. And workers may value job security over the pay and the promise of freelance work. So that also could play out one way or another. So when we map those two major uncertainties, the extent to which task automation is realised and the extent to which institutions for employment change, we can see 4 potential scenarios, which we've labelled harbours, oceans, lakes and rivers. I won't go into detail on all 4 of them, but I will talk about 2 of the most opposite. So in the lake scenario, this is where we see increased but relatively low task automation and limited change to institutional structures. Here, employment stays fairly stable. We require much the same skill sets, but on the other hand, we don't see the rapid technological improvements or efficiency gains that we might hope for from technological advancement and structural reforms. The risk in this scenario is that other countries undergo the technological revolution and Australia fails to change, in which case there could still be serious consequences for employment. Perhaps the most opposite scenario is the oceans one, where there is high technological advancement and real change to organisational structures. And what this might be similar to is the Green Revolution in America. Back in 1840, 70% of the workforce worked in agriculture. Today, 2% work in agriculture. The key point here is that automation did destroy many agricultural jobs, but there were also productivity improvements and overall net increases in employment, predominantly in the growing services sector. So our message here is, even if the major change does come to pass, we are not predicting that there won't be any jobs, but rather that we will need to change a lot in terms of how we work. And there is a real risk that some groups will be particularly vulnerable in this future. Perhaps, importantly, young people trying to get their first job, because task automation tends to work from the bottom up, removing those low-skill entry-level jobs first. And older, less skilled workers who have less time remaining to justify reskilling and who might well drop out of the workforce early rather than sticking around to transition. So we're certainly not the first to be talking about technology having a big impact on the way in which we work. And worries about this are not new either. The Luddite movement resulted in workers trying to destroy looms because they feared it would take away all the jobs, and here we are today, most of us overemployed. What we believe is that innovation and economic growth will create jobs, and these jobs will be created in the areas where the technology complements rather than substitutes for the human workers. And here are two examples which explain what I mean here. So back in 1992, I'm looking at the top graph, there were many bank workers, many bank tellers, and then ATMs came along and online banking came along, and we saw a significant decrease in the number of people who were working as bank workers. These people were technologically disrupted. But concurrently, we see a rise in a more skilled category, which is supported by digital technology. That is the financial brokers, the dealers, and the advisors. These people became more productive through using online tools to reach their customers and deliver their services. We see the same story in the photographic market. Some of you may remember the old days when you came along with a Kodak film and you took it into a shop and somebody had to develop it to produce some photographs for you. Now hardly anybody works in that role because we have digital cameras. And so many people have lost jobs as photographic developers. But concurrently, we see the rise of a new category of employment, the freelance photographer, whose productivity is greatly improved by digital technology, digital cameras, and online platforms. So we see this kind of change lying ahead. We can't tell you exactly what jobs will grow. We've got some guesses about what those future jobs might look like. More big data analysts, perhaps really sector-specific big data analysts, experts in using big data in healthcare versus agriculture versus defence. We think that the massive increase in the amount of data that's around and the massive increase in the choices that are possible and the complexity of our supply chain networks, which impact on a wider range of stakeholders, mean that making decisions will become ever more complex, and there will be a role for people who can simplify that decision space and create a finite set of options. With the rise of drones and automated vehicles, we might see new types of pilots and drivers and ship captains who work from offices and remote locations rather than in the fields. If people want to visit a shop, maybe do some grocery shopping, it's going to be a very different thing. The reason why you have gone into this bricks and mortar store rather than an online environment is for the experience. And so Woolworths may no longer be full of fluorescent lights and shopping trolleys, and instead maybe more like a coffee shop where you sit down and have a coffee with the customer experience expert who can talk through your lifestyle needs and suggest some of the products that might be relevant for you. And at the end of your experience, you don't take any heavy shopping bags home. They're delivered by a drone to your home. We might see a rise in personalised preventative health helpers. More people with chronic diseases and mental illness means we may see a rise in a category that is a kind of blend of your executive coach and your personal trainer, but more health-oriented, helping people to live better and longer. And finally, we might need online chaperones because our law enforcement agencies may not have the resources to protect individuals against the identity theft, the reputational damage, the social media bullying and the internet fraud. So just as we currently have lawyers to help us with our legal interests and doctors to help us with our health, we may also have our online chaperones to help us manage our online identity and interests. I can't tell you what work people will be doing in the future. What I do feel fairly confident about is that we need to be able to transition efficiently in the future. How individuals move from one job to another and how industries move from one labour market structure to another will be crucial to Australia's future prosperity. Some of you may recognise the lovely image on the slide at the moment. These are the Full Monty film that comes from the Full Monty film, which is about workers who lost their jobs in the mines and ended up trying to find a new source of work as male strippers. The point here is we don't want people to make choices like that. And we hope that this work that we have done and increased use of the online information and quality systems can help people make better choices about what training they need and what career paths they should follow to find their opportunity for the future and transition well. So I hope that's been interesting, and I'll hand over to Anne now to see if there are any questions for further discussion. Thank you for listening.
Fantastic, Claire. Thanks for that really comprehensive coverage. It's great to hear so much research being put into this issue. While I'm starting to go through the questions on the question pane, I'll just remind people to put those questions up as early as you can. I've got a number that have come through already, and we'll start with those, Claire. Claire, Sissy from Mackay wrote to us and said, it's a great presentation. Really got a lot out of it from the point of view of a HR expert in the sector.
Thank you, Sissy. Love to hear it's got some practical relevance.
That what she's seeing is there's a great degree of a gap almost between current tertiary training, and particularly she mentions in the area of allied health, which she's trained in, and the needs of the future workforce. Do you have any comments about that?
Absolutely, I do, Sissy. I've heard this type of comment before. We've been doing some work on how vocational education and training might change in the future in this more digital environment. And many employers were concerned that graduates are not coming out of their training sufficiently ready for the workplace. And I understand that healthcare is an area where this is a particularly pressing problem because employers need more healthcare workers but can't take them on fast enough because there's so much supervision involved in bringing people up to speed. So if you're interested, we have a report called The Vet Era. It's available on the Queensland TAFE website, where we've begun to discuss how digital technology might actually help vocational education providers and consumers to make more informed choices and to become more ready for the real work environment. So some of that's about perhaps more simulations as a training tool. Some of that is about giving the students a better understanding of which courses are associated with better employment outcomes. And then it's also about using digital technology to improve the communication between people such as yourself and the people who are delivering the training, because it's a much, much bigger training market than ever before, and employers are dealing with faster change than ever before. So it's certainly a big challenge. I would totally agree with you that it's something that needs much greater focus, and we really hope that we can work with people such as yourself to better understand how training providers can respond to that, and I think also importantly how to better understand the quality of different training providers, because it's been very difficult to differentiate good training and not so good training with all the deregulation that's occurred recently. I hope that's a relevant answer for you.
That's great, Claire. Thank you very much. Keep those questions coming in on the pane. I've got a question from Scott, or a bit of a comment actually from Scott, who's a Brisbane-based community care provider. Scott picked up on your issue around 47% of the workforce now could be fully automated. However, in his experience, that uptake has not been realised in community care service provision. And we're talking broadly across a range of services from community transport to domiciliary nursing to meal delivery. And I think, Scott, you're highlighting that our industry is not a big uptaker of technology. And he asked, is there any pointers from you about where to start?
Scott, big question. There are a couple of ways I would respond. One is that 47% estimate has been criticised. So 47% of the jobs that we currently do might be an overstatement, because you probably need to investigate specific elements of a person's work. Some elements maybe will be automated and some maybe won't. So that's probably an overstatement of the problem. However, it is a real thing. Number two, I agree. I have heard that there is a lack of digital capability within community service organisations. I guess it's a lack of resourcing generally, really, and that is going to be an ever more pressing problem going forward, because many community services organisations are relatively small, and it is very difficult for them to not only access technical expertise but also to keep up to date with the latest platforms and systems. I know there are groups out there such as Info Exchange in Victoria and Queensland who play a role in trying to be a bridge between the technology capability and the community services sector. I think that kind of work is incredibly important. And then I think you also asked how the first steps might occur. I think there has been some effort, and Anne actually can probably speak to this, to begin providing applications that the services workers can use with the customers, and they need to be very intuitive and relevant kinds of applications. So iPads are a fantastic example of something that makes digital technology friendly and relevant to most people. So if we can create these apps that actually work in the context of the normal interaction between customers and community services workers, we are simultaneously building the capacity of the worker and the customer. And I think that is a really important place to begin in terms of building that larger shift towards greater use of digital technology. Would you comment on that, Anne?
I'd comment that is happening, Claire, but there's still large sections of community care who aren't using devices out in the field. And a recent survey we undertook for the Aged Care Industry IT Council, looking at IT readiness for community care providers, shows something like 45% of workers were not mobile, didn't have mobile devices. So if they don't have the equipment, they're not going to be able to be digitally included. And then the other comment I'd make is that depending on which workforce statistics you look at, most of our workers are women over the age of 46 and haven't been really digitally included in the uptake of technology. So organisations need to do a lot more around that basic digital inclusion, and don't forget that you've got to start with the basics.
I think you're absolutely right. It's the less skilled workers that are at risk of being left behind, and that's a terrible concern because they're also the ones for which we don't see as many options in the future. You know, all the work will be for the more skilled people, and one of the points we're trying to make is that we have to focus much more on not just training the less skilled people to use digital technology, but making sure we understand what they can do, what the roles will be for them in the future, and that we don't let them fall behind.
Yeah. Thanks, Claire. I've got to go to a couple of comments and questions from members of our Expert Advisory Committee. So thank you, Annie. Annie Banbury's a researcher with the University of Central Queensland, who's doing a lot of area around investigations around the complexity of community care work and the way that technology engages and assists that work. And Annie's asking, is there a role for government to assist with small and medium-sized businesses to train staff to integrate technology into workforce? And sorry, and I think you're actually saying, Annie, into workflows.
That's an interesting question. I know the government has invested in initiatives to support small businesses in making better use of digital technology. They provide quite a lot of training, but your suggestion is much more specific and I think a really interesting one. I know that the Department of Employment is building a technology roadmap which begins to look at how different developments in digital technology will play out in different sectors. And I think the goal there is to begin to give people a sense of which aspects of the workflow are going to be taken over by technology in the near future and which won't, and therefore how better to plan human resources in the future. But I must say, I don't know that they are going further with that in the direction that you've suggested, and I think that's a really interesting gap that you've identified there.
And I'd comment, Claire, there, the work of our collaborative is really trying to influence what government's role should be in that workforce capacity building. And governments have always, in our sector, provided some assistance with the sector to capacity build their workforces, but we're seeing that that's been tightened up considerably or not offered, and some of the work industry players, including those who are working towards the development of an industry roadmap for technology, are trying to make sure that we can detail and quantify, but also engage with governments about industry's responsibilities and requirements when we have an open market system. So that's certainly a project that's within the collaborative that we would like to talk to you further about. So thanks, Annie. I hope I got your question spot on. And thanks, Dr. Eleanor Horton, who's also on our Expert Advisory Committee, who was going to ask a question about positioning of tertiary training. In Eleanor's case, she's a lecturer in nursing at Sunshine Coast University, and I know she's a great advocate for inclusion of the role of technology in professional practice and enhancing that professional practice. So I think you answered your question, answered Eleanor's question, answering Sissy's question. Would you like to make any
just
further?
One point that you reminded me of there, Eleanor, is also the importance of technology that allows training to be delivered in the workplace. So things like Google Glasses are now passé. There is a new version, I think it might be called Burning Glass, but my memory is appalling, so don't quote me on that. But, you know, tools through which you can get guidance on how to perform a task through the technology in the workplace as you need it. So that's much more in-time training and in-context training, and we know that kind of training tends to have far better learning outcomes than in the classroom prescribed structured kind of training schedules. So I hope that could also be part of the solution, and we're seeing some interesting technology in that space.
We've got another question from Marcus Wigan. Marcus is a great contributor, I think, from Victoria. Marcus, you can on the pane correct me if I've got that wrong. And I know that this question is very close to your heart about, Claire, could you expand on perhaps a tidal wave of far healthier, more highly educated people from 55 to 75, and how you see that impacting on the website, on the workforce, guess Marcus's comment was in relationship to the demographic change that's occurring.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Marcus. I think I might have met you once before. We are also interested in this question. There is huge potential in that older worker, kind of retired worker space that we fear could be lost if some kind of action is not taken to ensure that they remain included through this disruption. So yes, older workers tend to be the most likely to be made redundant when there is some sort of disruption like new technology. And they're also least likely to find a new job. That's a horrible prospect. But on the other hand, digital technology is creating new ways for people to participate, whether that is in earning money or in making the world a better place. And we've actually been engaging with stakeholders across a wide range of sectors to begin talking about what those opportunities look like and how we can facilitate them. And we're really keen to collaborate with other people with an interest in this space. So we've engaged with Telstra, we've engaged with Australia Post, we've engaged with many government organisations and not-for-profits, trying to look at how we can make sure those opportunities are enabled, but more importantly, that the individuals who could make use of them are empowered and understand that they exist. So can these people become seniorpreneurs? And if so, how do we make that simple and possible as opposed to just some theoretical concept? And that is actually an area that CSIRO really wants to invest in going forward. So thank you for that comment.
I've only got probably time for a couple more questions. Marion from WA picked up on your comment about people being overemployed, and Marion feels that she's one of those people.
Yes, me too.
And that perhaps many overemployed people are currently in the community care system.
Yes.
And she would like your advice about where to start to be less overemployed than she currently is.
I fear I'm not the best person to answer that question. We do hope that digital technology in challenging the existing organisational structures and institutions could create more flexibility. We can begin earning a little extra money on the side through Airbnb if we've got a spare room, and through Uber if we've got a spare car and spare time, but more importantly, as a skilled worker on platforms like Airtasker in Australia and Freelancer and Uwork, and maybe that is a relatively safe way of putting a toe in the water and exploring these new ways of working and supplementing your income. Now that's hard to explore when you are overemployed. So I would say that is part of what we hope can occur with this new way of working in the future, that experienced workers are juggling family responsibilities, incredibly high workloads, and extreme pressure to show the value of what they do to keep securing revenue or funding. And I think it's really important that we do look at how digital technology can empower those people to find new ways of working that are more flexible and more responsive to how people want to live. And I wish you all the best.
Thank you. We'll get a report back from you, Marion, if that advice is being put into action. Travis, thanks for your question. I know Travis is from a regional provider, but he's from a technology department in a regional provider, so not a direct service provider on but trying to provide some really good technological supports for workers. And Travis asks, with technology bringing new ways to work and interact with our clients, do you foresee any changes to the way that organisations or governments ensures that personal information is protected? Travis asks, particularly this is in relationship to international data storage challenges.
I suspect, Travis, you know more about this than I do. I'm a social researcher, that's my excuse. I know that there is a growing push towards making very large data sets more openly available, that there is seen to be untold economic value in data. And so, for example, government departments are gradually experimenting with opening up some of their data, and that makes the concern that you raised all the more real. What I can say is that there is also great awareness of community concerns and the need to ensure that there is social license around all this. So, for example, the Australian Bureau of Statistics recently tried running a census online, and around that wanted to store some personal information for the purpose of being able to link that data on an individual level over time. That does have enormous value, but people were very concerned about that, and we could see a real reaction to that. So I think managing how to realise not just the economic but also the social value of these data, which mean that we can find people who need services and aren't getting them and direct our resources much more efficiently. We want to be able to do this, but we must manage it well. And I think this is a problem that people are grappling with around the world. And I think a really interesting point that somebody from Harvard University who works on civil society and a digital economy said to me was also we don't appreciate how much the information that we receive is being managed and tailored. That increasingly what we think is an open search on, say, Google around something will produce different results for different individuals based on what the system knows about you. And essentially, so whilst we think that the internet is opening up and democratizing information and knowledge, we also don't fully understand the way in which algorithms are actually tailoring access to knowledge. And I don't think enough is being said about that one either. So that to me is a bit of a corollary to your question, Trevor, and I'm sorry I don't have the answer again, but I agree it's a really interesting issue.
Thanks, Travis, and thanks, Claire, for that response. I've got a question about just clarification about the definition of portfolio workers. Could you expand on that? And that's from Laura, who comes from an HR background.
Hi, Laura. I'm happy to try as long as you don't quote me. As I understand it, a portfolio worker is someone who receives income streams from multiple sources. So when you work in an organisation like CSIRO, you usually obtain all your salary from just that one organisation. But increasingly, people are doing maybe a few days a week in a part-time job as, say, a teacher's aide, and then they're also earning a bit of extra money on the side by selling, say, their craft work online through Etsy, and then they might also earn a bit of money taking elderly people out to the movies once a week. That's a portfolio worker because they are working for multiple employers and achieving multiple income streams. And I believe that's actually quite a common situation in regional communities where people these days have to be a lot more entrepreneurial. So, for example, you can't just be a farmer, you need to also run a B&B, and you might also do some work in the Rural Fire Brigade or for emergency services on the side. That's kind of what we mean by a portfolio worker.
And Claire, I think there's some great examples of disruptive community care services who are using the concept of portfolio workers very well. And recently, just in the last couple of days, I've been talking to one of those classified disruptive providers of community care. And they're openly saying that they're providing, as well as a community care service, they're providing great workforce opportunities for people who just want to be portfolio workers. They actually don't want to be tied to one job, and they don't want to have to be a generalist in that job. They actually want experience, and he used the example of a staff member who had gone from full-time work, is working in this disruptive community care Uber-style service delivery approach. She also manages her Uber shifts around the shifts she wants to operate in community care, and then she has some regular set patterns of work. So she also is able to be flexible with her social life around her job relationships, and that's seemingly becoming the representation of the workers who are going to that service.
And I think the NDIS kind of scheme is meant to enable that. And the beauty of that is more personalised service delivery, where individuals such as a retired nurse can provide community care in their own home, and the recipient can get a more personal kind of experience of care. I think that person is wonderful, and unfortunately not everyone feels empowered to branch out and do things differently like that, and it's partly that headspace that I hope we can help to create, where people do feel able to explore those opportunities and hopefully find that more flexible and rewarding way of working and delivering services.
Claire, thank you. That's all the time that we've got available today for questions. But look, thank you very much. I think you've opened up a great discussion about the role that and the attention that we should pay to future workforces. Through the work of the collaborative, we're doing some major work particularly around remote workers, where people are no longer, because of program and funding changes, perhaps we don't have the level of money in the system anymore for capital infrastructure and those lovely buildings and the main street of cities and towns, but the people are really being forced to work remotely, sometimes without the infrastructure, structure, security, safety, and the really investigation of risk and governance issues related to it. So that work is progressing in the collaborative, and we're keen to expand on that in the coming year and share that with the community within our collaborative.
And it's great, because I talk very positively about this, but there are risks as well that will only emerge over time. So I think it's fantastic that you are thinking already about those concerns.
Thank you, Claire. A great presentation, great research. We're really keen to ensure that all our work is underpinned by great research and good evidence. And this is an example of where I think all of this could come together to really inform a better placed workforce for community care providers. And so on behalf of everyone on the webinar today and those who will access it when it becomes online in the future, thank you for Taylor in making this session for us today. And particularly I note that you're going on extended long service leave today, so as well as this you're packing up your office. So thank you again. It's been a great presentation.
Thank you, and I'd just like to say thank you to everyone who works in the community services space, because I think it's such valuable work and not always recognised properly. So thank you.
Thanks, Claire, for that acknowledgement. Just for everyone online, we've got a couple of more upcoming webinars in December. On the 6th of December, Tuesday next week, I think, we've got another in the session of very basic, how do you use the iPad, and those who attended the accessibility features of the iPad, that was one of our most attended sessions. This presenter is going to come back and look at how this device can assist with people with vision impairment, so drilling down on one piece of technology and how it's revolutionising people like myself who have vision impairment. The next session the same week is on Friday of next week. Our expert reference team member, Dr. Kevin Doughty. Kevin's well known throughout Australia and is the director of the Centre for Home Usable Technologies at the Universities of York, Newcastle and Coventry. Kevin's going to provide a session specifically tailored to emerging smart assistive technologies in wearable devices supporting people with hearing loss. And then to end off our year, we've got another presentation on the 15th of the 12th, and it's on the use of electronic assistive technology by people with a disability living particularly in shared supported accommodations. So Liz and the team will be sending out some information on those and registration details. A couple of upcoming events we've got early next year that we wanted to flag with you to get some dates in your diaries. In February we'll be travelling through central western Queensland with a roadshow, and we'll have details of that released shortly. If you've got services, clients, interest in the areas in central western Queensland, we'd love you to drop us a note through the collaborative or directly to the collaborative project reference team with your interest. In the 14th and 15th of March, we're undertaking a conference on the symposium, on the 14th of March called Community Care Business Transformation Through Innovation. And this will be bringing together a number of partners and a number of areas of interest. Details of that will be out before the Christmas break. On the 15th of March, we've got some great workshops aligning with the symposium, and those workshops include a dedicated stream of workshops on living labs and also a dedicated stream on workforce development. So we'll be talking to Claire and others further about that. And some of those workshops will really address some of the issues that Claire has raised in her presentation today, and where our sector is trying to respond, or partners to our sector as collaborations are trying to respond to that. Through April we'll be far north Queensland, so if you've got particular areas of geographical interest, but we'll be concentrating also on the delivery and reshaping of services provided to regional and rural communities, as well as special needs groups like Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. And then hopefully all of you will join us for a study tour and an innovation site visits throughout Asia and Canada in line with the International Congress on Smart Homes and Health Telematics, and that'll happen in late June. Thanks everyone for your attendance today. I'd particularly like to acknowledge two key players in our Community Care Smart Assistive Technology Collaborative Project team, Elizabeth Dodd and Imogen Guinea, and thank you too for bringing this all together today. I'd like to again acknowledge the individuals and their organisations who support the work of this collaborative through being part of the expert reference group. Thank you Dr. Eleanor Horton and Annie Banbury for being on board today. I'm sure there's other members of the expert reference group who are on board today, so thank you for your contribution. I'd again particularly acknowledge the Queensland Government for their foresight in providing us some funding and their willingness to fund our unsolicited proposal. I guess I'd like to individually acknowledge the project management team from the department who really support our project and provide a lot of input to the future development. But finally, I'd like to really again thank our presenter today, Dr. Claire Mason. Fantastic work that she is undertaking with her colleagues, and really informative for a healthy and viable and sustainable workforce for community care provision in the future. Thanks everyone for attending.